What's up, Yang Gang? So after a long hiatus, we are finally back. As you can see, I'm in my new studio, aka the living room. We've been doing lots of painting and lots of home repairs, and hopefully we'll be able to start putting out videos again on a regular basis. So without further ado, we're gonna bring Brenda in here, who is our special guest today. Brenda, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Now you said that we might get interrupted by some singing.
Yeah, my son is home from college, and I told him right before we got on here that he had to be quiet. And 10 seconds later, he came out screaming a song.
It's
So
okay. My son just got mad at me because I told him that we had to commandeer the computer for this interview, and he was playing a game, so he's a little bit salty himself. But it's all good. Well, thank you for being here today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I am, as you said, I'm Brenda Siegel, and I am a low-income single mom, and I have been involved in politics in one way or another throughout my entire adult life. But I was raised in an upper middle class family, and I found poverty as an adult, and raised my son struggling. And about 2 years ago, I just got sick of it, and I got sick of us not changing what we need to change, so that people like me can not only survive but also thrive in Vermont and across the country. And so I ran for governor in 2018 with no name recognition, no access to money, and no time, because I started running just 3 months before the race started. We can get into that a little bit later. It was quite a ride, and then I ran again this last time. And what I learned is that when you are speaking for a population, or with a population that often isn't heard, it is a tough road, but a really important one, and a lot of change gets made along the way.
For sure. We're kind of new to Vermont ourselves, having moved up here during Andrew's campaign. And one thing that I've noticed is here in Vermont, it's almost like you either have a lot of money or you have no money. And there's so many huge houses here, and they're all split up into like these duplexes where there's several families living in one house that's been split up. And it costs so much to live here. It's quite a shock for us just how expensive it is. We just traded basically a rent payment, and we're able to get financed on a house. But now instead of a rent payment, we have the mortgage payment, and we also have a $500 a month oil bill. It's like, what the hell? It costs a lot to live up here. Don't you talk about that for a minute? Because I've noticed that it's basically just a tourist place.
So I think that I believe that our main problem isn't as much how much it costs, because when you actually do the research commensurate to the areas around us, it's not a lot more expensive when you total all the expenses, not just your home expenses, but in terms of gas, in terms of shopping, all of the things that you have to do. However, we have way less opportunity than everywhere around us, and we have lower wages. And so when you average our lower wages and our way less opportunity, and then our costs being, depending on where you live, being commensurate with local other places nearby, other states nearby, what you find is that it isn't affordable to live here, and it's not as much because we're doing something wrong in terms of cost. It's more that we're doing something wrong in terms of opportunity. However, I would say that that really does depend on where you live, because, for example, in Brattleboro, which is where I grew up, rents are as high in some cases as Burlington, but our average income is, I believe, $29,000 a year. Our median income is around $29,000 a year, whereas the median income in Burlington is much higher, and the rents are very similar. And so when you look at that we are not providing the same opportunity as equal to what rent is, or as equal to what the home ownership or property tax is, then you start to see that problem with not being able to afford to live here. And then there really is no way out for most parts of Vermont because of the opportunity loss.
Right. Yeah. I, I mean, you talk about opportunity, and I don't know how you can change the mentality in this state because it seems like tourism is number one, it's ingrained in the culture here. But Andrew talks about there's places that soak up certain talent groups. Like Silicon Valley soaks up, all the tech guys, and there's all these different areas of the country. And I don't see that here in Vermont. Vermont has doesn't there's just no opportunity here. I mean, unless you want a maple syrup farm or the operation, I mean, it's crazy. And now I've seen the economy constrict so much here in Vermont since COVID hit and all these restrictions and lockdowns. I don't know how a lot of these businesses here are going to survive.
Yeah, so I have been a business owner for 18 years, and my business is not operational during COVID, and I don't know if it can come back, to be honest. And this incarnation of my business was created to help our main streets survive following Tropical Storm Irene, and so it's kind of ironic that another crisis could knock out the changes that we made at that time, but I think that the tourism industry it's the industry sort of, but we also call ourselves a state full of artists, and yet we don't have a lot of resources for artists. So artists are not surviving. Artists are on food stamps. Artists are providing for our children in classes, in work, in creating entertainment for us, but not able to feed their own families. And so we need to start rethinking our entire culture about what kind of work we value, about whether or not we believe that people should survive regardless of income, whether or not we believe that people should survive regardless of mental health or substance use disorder. We really need to start to believe, I mean, as I do, that we want opportunity for all of us, and not only because I believe that the morality should be there, because you cannot agree with me about that and still understand that our economy would be stronger if everyone could survive. If everyone was thriving in our state, then more people would be spending money in local businesses. Then we would have more more Vermonters owning homes. We would have more people able to move here with their young children because there would be more opportunity for thriving, and we would have less parents hoping that their children do find work elsewhere where they can survive.
You sound a lot like somebody who was running for president not long ago. Now, if you don't mind me asking, who did you support in the presidential? I mean, in the primaries, I guess we'll say.
Bernie Sanders. But I want to be really clear that I think there were other good candidates as well. And I think
You can say his name. It's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Andrew Yang was very good. I think that Elizabeth Warren was very good, and I felt that they brought really strong ideas to the table. And I believe in robust primaries. I really believe in robust primaries. So I'm glad that we had such a robust primary because it allowed for a robust conversation and allowed us to push some around economic justice and especially around racial justice. That issue was talked about in a way that I haven't seen it talked about before and should be talked about a lot more.
But you talk about a robust primary and stuff, but like in the end, did it even matter? Because ultimately, what the establishment wanted was what the establishment got, and once again, the establishment rules.
So that's one place where I really hope we start. I'm glad you have me here today because I really hope we start talking about this more. It does matter. Even if you lose your primary, whether it's president, whether it's state legislature, whether it's city council or select board or school board, no matter what you're running for, whether or not you win or lose is only part of it. A huge part of it is what you choose to do with the time that you're in that election cycle as a candidate. Andrew Yang's a really good example, actually, of what he chose to do while he was in that primary. He chose to talk a lot about universal basic income. He chose to talk about the humanity of our country and how important it is to make sure that we are lifting up all people in this country. And if we don't start talking, if we don't start to realize how much power you have as a candidate to make change, and how you can build that power forward, just as so many of those presidential primary candidates are doing right now. They're taking that platform and just pushing forward on the ideas that they had. Even ones who dropped out really early in the race are doing that. And I think that you really have an incredible amount of power. And that's why if grassroots activists, if people who are marginalized like myself, or people who experience even deeper systemic marginalization, if they run for office, we have to make it not, yes, of course we want to win. And that was not my last run, but we have to make it not just about winning. It has to also be about what we're bringing to the table, what we're offering the people of our state, the people of our country throughout the process and beyond. Because if you're going to run and then just disappear afterwards, then I don't know why you were running in the first place, because it should be the only reason you should be running to serve should not be about your career. It should be about helping and serving in our state, in our country.
And it sounds like we need more people like you in offices, because that's something that seems to be lost on the people who are in power right now, is that they're supposed to be serving the people. And it's quite clear that they're not. The fact that they haven't passed another stimulus bill to help the American people while millions and millions are going without right now. They're facing an eviction crisis. And the fact that we've gotten one $1,200 stimulus check throughout this whole ordeal, it just goes to show the disconnect that Washington has. They don't realize that what we call the broke folk vote, which is the average everyday Americans who can't afford that $500 unexpected bill, bro, we're living paycheck to paycheck as it is. And now you throw in COVID into the mix and we're already starving and we don't know how we're going to make the bills now. And now on top of it, we can't go to work. Are you kidding me? And then you're going to pass a $1,200 stimulus in the span of how many months has it been? 6 months?
Right. It's longer. I think we're on our 9th month right now. And so yes, I will lose my unemployment. So I'm on PUA unemployment. So unless they extend those benefits, I will no longer qualify for unemployment benefits on December 26th. While right this second, I can get the heat in my house. I can do all the things that I need to do here in Vermont. I'm very cognizant of a few weeks from now when those things all may go away, and not because there's not enough money, not because there's scarcity, but because the wealthy are so greedy. Not all the wealthy, but a portion of the wealthy that have power right now are so greedy, and the people in poverty are so taxed that they can't actually fight, and the middle class are so taxed that we can't actually fight for our needs the way that we want to or the way that we should. And then on top of that, what we're really dealing with here is Leader McConnell, who is just I can't think of any other word but evil when I think of him, because I don't know how you lay down at night and go to sleep knowing that we have record deaths right now, that we are even in this state. Today we had a record high for the number of cases, and all across the country, that's what we're seeing every single day. And people are suffering. People's businesses are never going to come back. Some are going to come back. And they're going to need help. And we don't need help for the big businesses. We don't need help for all of Trump's companies and Jared's companies, which apparently a lot of that PPP loans went to. However, what we do need is we need help on the ground for middle-class families and for low-income families. We need help on the ground for small business owners. We need to actually be willing to do that work. And right now we have a leader in the Senate who can sleep at night knowing that he's causing the death and suffering of people.
Well, Brenda, I had the advantage of coming from the conservative side. before I became what I term a Yangocrat. I'm only here as a Democrat because of Andrew Yang. But I've had the opportunity to see both sides of this coin, and both sides are working. It's clear that they work for the same corporations. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, yes, Mitch McConnell, he's an SOB, and I can't stand him. But you know what? I can't stand Nancy Pelosi either, because she's just as much to blame for this as he is. Because when she had an opportunity to help pass something that was a little bit smaller, and she was like, no, 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 we can't do that because it's got to be all or nothing. It's got to be all or nothing. And that type of all or nothing mentality helps screw the American people too. So it's both sides of this.
It's absolutely, there is problems on both sides. I will say about the $500 billion that McConnell offered, it didn't offer any extension of unemployment benefit. So a lot of people, you never know the details, right? Because the way the media presents it, it never has the details involved. And the details are really important. The devil is there. And that bill does not have any extension of unemployment benefits. It does not have checks to people across the country. And it takes away the ability for you or I to sue our employer if our employer knowingly causes COVID.
For sure. And Mitch McConnell, man, I can't, and it's exactly what you say. Most people don't even know what's in that bill. Now, the sources that I go to, they break down the whole entire bill and who's offering what and what's going on and all of this. But the average American person doesn't know the breakdown of these bills, and it's to think that these people can sit up there and have the audacity to not include something for the American people that's what I don't understand, Brenda, is like we have this high disapproval rating, and yet we have the same people getting elected time after time after time after time. It kind of makes me think that the whole game is rigged.
Well, there is a lot of systemic oppression. So when you're running for office, so this is a great way to talk about this. When you're running for office, part of the reason we have the people we have in office and not people like me and less of the AOCs and less of the Cori Bushes and less the people who have come from real struggle, less of that, is because it's really hard to run for office. It's really expensive to run for office. You need to have a network of people who will donate to you. If you, my first race, I ran for governor. Again, I had 3 months. My nephew had died of an overdose 2 months before I entered the race. I was supposed to enter the next week after he died. I literally had made the decision to run on March 7th and he died on March 8th. And so I ran with 3 months left to go. I ran on a robust platform about economic justice and building a bottom-up economy, on healing the overdose crisis, and on climate change. And I was only able to raise. I had no people I could ask for large contributions from, and I was only able to raise a total of $19,000 in that race. I ended in campaign debt, but very small. I mean, comparatively, very small campaign debt. I spent very little money in that race. I was very lucky to be in Vermont. That's a very small amount of money to raise. And I was still able to get almost a quarter of the vote. But that's not actually usual. I happen to be strong in the retail politics realm. I'm really good at getting around myself around the state. It's a small state to get around. But even then, to end in debt and again to run again and raise a lot more money, I raised a lot more of this race, still I ended in debt, and I can't cover that debt, right? So that means that for a lot of people, that would be a deterrent for the next race, because to have to continue to raise money afterwards because it can't come out of your pocket. Whereas people who have money, I always like to say money begets money. People who have money always have people to ask for money. People who are well connected within the realm of the people around them, who were raised with around the most politically elite people, even if they themselves are not super wealthy, they are connected to those people, and then they are able to raise that money. So the thing we have to do if we want to change what you're talking about here is we have to actually change the public finance system. It really has to be a fully robust public finance system that everyone uses, because once you do that, then you have the opportunity to have regular folks run and win for office. Because right now it's literally both with, I like to use AOC and Cori Bush as an example. They come from two different backgrounds. Cori Bush is a single mom, a low-income single mom who is a nurse and an activist. And AOC is an activist, waitress. We know a lot about AOC, so I don't need to go into that. But they both were lifted up by Justice Democrats who really pushed forward, helped them raise money, helped them get their name out there, lifted their name up over 2-year periods. And it's really that heavy of a lift to win if you come from a struggling background. And it should not be so much heavier of a lift for people who have never had opportunity or access than it is for people who have lots of opportunity and access. And so it takes people running again and losing and being willing to have that conversation afterwards in order to really make those changes. Because otherwise it just becomes, well, look, AOC did it. Well, no, we need to talk about all the people who have been willing to throw their hat in the ring and put themselves out there. And they can tell you firsthand how hard that was.
So in that case, then would you agree with something like democracy dollars, which Andrew Yang was proposing, where everybody gets a certain amount of democracy dollars that they can only spend on elections, and that would, in effect, it would wash out the corporate money in Washington at a ratio of something like 5-1, and it would give power back to the American people, giving them a voice again.
I think that I mean, there's a lot of, to me, what I call stopgap measures, a lot of measures we could do that would be a good in between. So like that would be a good thing to do until we got to public financing. But if you can think of the power of everyone who's running for governor in Vermont, we'll use Vermont as an example. Everyone who's running for governor in Vermont has the same amount of money. So the question isn't how well connected you are or who you grew up around or how many people you know, because even in that scenario, you can imagine that low-income people who have been waitressing their whole lives only know the people around them, right? So whereas a wealthier person might still have been able to figure out a way to get their name out there before they entered the ring, and that, so it still creates an inequity issue. But can you imagine a scenario where everybody had the same amount of money? And then the question is, how creative are you with it? You all have the same amount of resources to hire your staff. You all have the same amount of resources to pay your staff. You all have the same amount of resource for TV ads and all of that. And that means that the conversation in the media no longer becomes about who raised the most money, but instead it becomes about the political ideas, who's actually gaining the traction.
That sounds like a good idea, but like, how do we get to that point? Because I'm sitting here and I'm trying to think, okay, and I'm gonna be honest, this is actually the first time I've heard anything about this kind of funding for a campaign. It sounds like a good idea, but it sounds like it's going to have a whole lot of obstacles because the people who have the money are not going to want this.
So there's states that do it right now. We haven't done it on a federal level yet. But what we need, so I'm working on it in Vermont right now. But we need, how these things always change is we talk about them, right? So we start having the conversation. We say, in the interim, maybe you do have democracy dollars. In the interim, maybe you do have these other measures to make sure that people have have resources that they need to be able to be part of our democratic process. But we also start talking about, where do we want to get? What's the ultimate goal? Because if we don't say what the ultimate goal is, then we have a hard time actually getting to that goal, right? Because we're like, oh, we took this step, and now okay, that's great. Now I'd like to take this step. Well, I have no problem saying out loud that my ultimate goal is public financing. How we get there, that's a question, that's a conversation that we have to have as a whole body. And I think it benefits Democrats and Republicans and independents and everyone to change to that kind of model, and probably ranked choice voting.
So to break this down though, okay, so Okay, so for those of us who aren't informed about this, okay, so instead of like, okay, everybody donates who donates to an Act Blue account, it goes and it gets split to the whoever's running for the Democratic Party. Is
Nobody
that
donates. The money you donate can go to a nonprofit. It doesn't have, and that's part of my problem with the way that we fund elections right now, is that I wrote an article about this actually in 2017. It's that, or I guess it was more recent than that, but maybe it was 2018. But is that we right now spend billions of dollars on elections and during an election year, a nonprofit that's maybe feeding people who are experiencing homelessness braces for loss because we're spending so much money on elections, we don't donate as much to nonprofits. And so we end up actually causing some harm with the system we have as well. So that's one of my major problems with it. And so I always say there was one quarter where Bernie raised $26 million. That's the number I remember. Don't quote me. But I remember, and that's what made me write this article, because I said, it's great. And he had raised the most money. And I said, it's one thing for the media to be blasting how you raised the most money. But if you don't use that moment to then say, we have to move to public finance system because this should not be about access. This should not be not just access for because he has grassroots donations, but he has access because he's had the privilege of being able to build up a list over 40 years, which he's an incredible politician who's really speaking for all of us. But there's a reality to why certain people get there and why others do not.
Yeah, but I'm not understanding though, because you're saying that you don't donate. Where does the money come from to fund these campaigns?
So we have right now you would have so I'm not going to get deeply into that, mostly because I haven't thought through a national version of what this would look like as much as I would like to. But if you think about how ultimately little money it would cost, because it wouldn't become this ridiculous amount of money that we would spend on elections either. If you look at Canada is a place where there's public funding. There's places in Europe where there's public funding and election periods are shortened too. That's probably too much to ask in the United States. But to figure out how we do that. So obviously this is a tax, but I really want to be really careful about the way we talk about that, because a lot of times when we hear tax, we say, oh my God, I'm going to lose more money. But
that's what tax means.
Well, it doesn't necessarily, because higher taxes don't always mean less money in your pocket, and lower taxes don't always mean more money in your pockets. Healthcare is a really good example of that. We're spending way more money on healthcare than we would if it were a tax and we all got it. We would spend, as individuals, none of us would be spending $600 a month, or families spending $1,800 a month to pay for healthcare plus all the out-of-pocket costs. We would be paying a certain percentage, and that would be consistent, and it would be way lower. My uncle told me that I believe it was $50 a month in Canada he pays. He is not low income. He is not struggling, and he is paying $50 a month and has access to healthcare. That is nothing, right? Compared to what we spend on healthcare, all of us. So in that case, a tax is actually more money in our pockets, not less. So, right. And what Vermonters want and what Americans want is more money in their pockets. So if we started talking about taxes a little bit differently, like, will this end us with more money in our pockets? Will this end us with a better, more productive society where more people have more opportunity and the resources they need to thrive?
I guess I can see that. And it makes sense, if you have this quote tax, but then you're not donating to, Andrew's campaign and because I know how much I donated to Andrew's campaign. I mean, I've got more merch than I know what to do with.
Right, exactly. And the same thing happened to me in Bernie's first campaign. In this campaign, I was little more active in my own. I knew I was going to run again, so I was a little more active in my own campaign. But at the time, but in the first campaign, I kept, like every time they asked for $3 or $5, I was like, sure, I'll do that. Yep, absolutely, I'll do that. And it became like if I looked back and looked at how much money compared to how much I could actually afford to spend on it, you would find out. And I think that a lot of people find that out. And just having run for office, I've looked at those lists, and I can tell you that a lot of people ultimately spend more money than they probably have to spend on elections. Now, the general population may not. And let's look at the other problem with this. You spent a lot of money on Andrew Yang's campaign, but have you donated at that level? And I don't know if you have, so this may backfire. Have you donated at that level to down ballot candidates, to people in House races, and in state House races and select boards or city councils, school boards?
Not to the level that I donated to Andrew Yang, but I have donated many times to down ballot.
That's really great, and a lot of people don't.
Yeah, so, and it's unfortunate because and a lot of that is because we don't have expendable dollars.
Right, exactly.
And that's the vast majority of the United States, man. I come from a background, I call myself a lifelong conservative, but I've never once donated to a conservative campaign. I've never once, I think one time I worked on a conservative campaign, and then that was it. That was the extent of, my activism. And then this guy named Andrew comes along, and it's like, wow, finally somebody understands the average everyday American. It's refreshing. And I was, this guy deserved to have every bit of our energy put into his campaign. And talk about what you see as the differences between, let's say, a Bernie Sanders and an Andrew Yang.
Okay. So I happen to be someone who's kind of unique. Well, not unique, but unique in that I really do see value in the ideas that come from many different candidates. That's why I like robust primaries. Andrew Yang, I do think Andrew Yang also, of course, also comes from a place where he has privilege, and so but he was bringing forth ideas that would have. I think he was bringing them from more of an economic perspective, but ideas that would have that would help the average American to pay their bills. So he wasn't. He really ran on universal basic income, right? So that was his main gig.
That was the main bullet, but and that was the big misconception about Andrew Yang, though. That was the main thing that he was pushing. But if you went to his website, the man had a policy for everything. I mean, literally over 100 policies.
And that's what's really hard, is that people don't go to your website, right? They don't check. One thing I liked about mail-in balloting, actually, was that during the primary, I got lots of people who were like, I'm filling out my ballot right now. I looked at all the websites. I'm leaning towards you, but I have these questions. And so they would send us an email. We'd answer their questions, and we'd either convince them to vote for me or not. But they actually had the opportunity to do a little research and then ask the candidate directly. Again, it's a small state, so you have access to your politicians in this state. But I think it's that was really cool. But the difference really between, there's so many differences, and what Andrew, I think, what Yang spoke to, I think was really people who had never heard us say, let's just give people money. Right? I mean, because that's what you heard if you didn't go to the website, was that. And people had never heard us say, and not just for no reason, but let's give people money because then we will have a more thriving economy. Because that's what it's going to take to make this country whole and to make people whole. And we need to run on humanity first, right? We need to make sure that that's what we're doing. And that isn't so far off from Bernie Sanders' message, right? Bernie Sanders' message is, let's do these things because it's what it will take for people to survive. And so they were slightly different ideas, but a very similar message. And I believe that there were several candidates in that primary who, whether or not they fully believed it or had in the past supported it the way that they said they did, is another story, but who ran on a message of putting people before profit.
Yeah, and that's that's something I feel like Bernie Sanders has been saying for a long time. But it's tough for me because I it's not that I dislike Bernie Sanders. It's more that I think his ideas would have been good 15, 20 years ago. But now the time for a $15 minimum wage is kind of past.
Now it's time for a $24 minimum wage. So.
But that's just the thing. We go, okay, right. Okay. So we're in this era of coronavirus, and automation of jobs is just, it's only being exacerbated by the coronavirus situation, because the one thing that doesn't get sick is automation. Automation doesn't come down with coronavirus. No. And for as many jobs as it creates, it's just going to displace so many more. Okay, well, so you're looking at this now, and it only gets darker from here. And that's why I feel like it's so important for a voice like Andrew's to be out there in the forefront, because it seems like he's been the only one talking about this for a while now.
Well, so, and the other thing about him is he's willing to do the work, right? Right now, he's that, which to me is super important. He is, and actually that's similar to Bernie. He's right now right now he's in Georgia literally knocking on doors. He's willing to do the work to make sure that we can pass things like his ideas. He is willing to put, move his family to make sure that we're creating a better society for everyone. And when you look at that that's very inspiring to people. That's very exciting to people to have that message really out there. The thing I didn't like about the primary is that, the media tends to presume winners, right? Which Joe Biden was not the presumed winner in this case, actually. So when you look at how that played out, it was very interesting, because in the beginning, the media was not presuming him the winner. However, they have presumed winners and presumed losers, right? And so it's very hard to get ahead of the media message that says that that X person can't win. It's very hard to get above that, past that media message. And so working 7,000 times harder to make sure that your message is out there so that you are making change. Nobody's going to soon forget the message that Andrew Yang brought to this primary. Nobody has for years now. I have been a strong voice both on opioid policy and on economic justice in our state since I ran for governor. Before I ran for governor, economic justice was what I was more known for. But after the death of my nephew and that run, I certainly made the overdose crisis a huge part of it. And nobody is going to soon forget the message that I brought to the primaries. And I'll continue to be able to do that work, which also Andrew Yang is going to continue to be able to do that work. Elizabeth Warren is going to continue to do that work. Bernie Sanders obviously is continuing to do that work, right? And they wouldn't have had the same platform to do it had they not run for president. So I do think that there have to be more voices out there, but we have to remember that it's not just about, let's even look at Joe Biden. Joe Biden, this is his third time running for president. He lost 2 other times running for president.
He should have lost this time. but then at the same time, I say he should have lost this time, but I don't like Trump either. That's the problem. How is it that we as the American people, like, that's the cream of the crop? We got Trump and we got Biden? Are you kidding me?
So I will tell you that Biden was not my first choice or my 10th choice. But during the general election, I'll tell you the things that won me over. Not entirely, I'm not like pro go Biden. I still am, my policies are much, much more progressive. And what I want to see change is much, much more progressive. But there's a couple of things. I know from having lost my brother died in 1996 of an overdose, and then it was his son that died 2.5 years ago, and whose upbringing I was a big part of. And I know from having those losses that you can't have grief, you can't have crisis like that, loss like that, and not develop empathy for other people who are harmed. After 4 years of Trump, having someone there who can speak to the American people and say, I understand your pain, because a lot of people are dying right now, that is, I think, really powerful. So I'm not saying his policies are my favorite, but I'm saying that kind of thing is really important, because that's the starting place. So he's always operated one way, but there's an empathy side that if you can get enough people in there having the conversation with him. I've watched, when I do work inside the Vermont legislature, I've watched what it takes to change minds on issues. And what it takes is being really willing to have those conversations. So when I think about who I'd like to fight on policy, leaving the primary behind, when I think about who I'd like to fight on policy, when I was looking at this general election, it was clear to me which one of those candidates I wanted to be able, like, I wanted to have a path, a way to have a path for progress. And I don't see any path for progress with President Trump, because he only cares about himself.
I understand that. I understand the Trump hatred, but you're just talking about how he has empathy. That's purely an emotional response. It has nothing to do with logic or policy or anything like that. And the fact of the matter is, Joe Biden has been voting the same way since as long as I've been alive, and I'm 45 years old. Are you kidding me? You can't dismiss 45 years of history. You just can't.
Do you think that well, so I think that emotional response has been missing from our government for a long time, right? We have never seen Joe Biden vote or create policy since his son died, which I think his adult son dying was a huge thing. I'm not saying he's going to give us what we want. I want to be really clear about that. We are going to have to push hard for change, but at least we're working with someone we even have a path to push with. We didn't even have a path before. We were just fighting against disaster for the last 4 years. And I prefer to have a way to push forward, even if it's pushing hard, than to be constantly pushing back against whatever disaster is going to come forward. Because that was I was exhausted during the last 4 years. I don't know about other people, but I think a lot of folks were like, I understand the problem. I certainly do, but I also see the benefits. And that's one way that I'm actually, as a progressive, I'm very, I tend to be, I don't like to use the word pragmatic, but I tend to really be able to, what I'm always looking for as an advocate is the opening to make change. And I'm grateful to have an opening to make change, even if it's a small opening.
I get it, I guess. I don't know. It's hard for me because, I'm, like I said, I came from the conservative side, former Trump voter, but the only side that I see that has been going crazy for the past 4 years is the left. And then, because you see the right's not going crazy. They're not getting all out of sorts. It's only the left. But then again, now that it's Joe Biden, it's going to be the right that's all out of sorts for the next 4 years. And it's going to be them that's, oh, the world's ending because now we're going to socialism, and they're going to use all their little trigger words. And the fact of the matter is, no matter who wins or loses, this is the same situation that we've been in for the past so long, because we are trapped in a left-right dichotomy. And we have to get out of that left-right dichotomy, or we're not going to ever get any better.
Well, in one of the forums, this last race, one of the forums I was asked, specifically, I was asked, do you think we should create a third party? There was a bunch of correct questions. And I said, the thing I hate about this question is that I think we should talk about policy. I think we should talk about issues. I have a really hard time with the party dynamic and party building and all of that stuff, because I think as soon as you go there, you stop talking about people. And I want to talk about people. I want to talk about our earth. I don't want to have this fighting dynamic. I want to make sure that you are those grassroots organizers and activists who were pushing back really hard the last 4 years. I want to learn from them. I mean, I'm one of them, but I want to learn from the folks in which who've been doing that work on the ground. I want to learn why. I mean, when I'm working on opioid policy in the Vermont legislature, there was a bill that ended up ordered to lie because of COVID, but would have passed otherwise to decriminalize buprenorphine, which would save a lot of lives. It may have saved my nephew's life, and it would save a lot of lives. But I had, it was in one committee for 2 sessions, which was a really frustrating process. I had to sit down and have really deep conversations with Republicans about both my story and the science behind, and it's Vermont Republicans. It is a little bit different inside the legislature, not outside necessarily, but I had to have really deep conversations about the story and the science and the data. And by the end, these Republicans were coming to me when they were ready to pass it out of committee and saying, we made some amendments, Brenda. With those amendments, will it still save people's lives? So I had, as a progressive, like a Democratic, very left candidate, won the trust, former candidate, won the trust of Republicans to be asked me, will this save people's lives? And that only happens if you're willing to have those really hard conversations, because on the ground, people just care about whether or not they can thrive or survive. All of the hype that happens on social media, all of that stuff, it doesn't really matter. There are lots of ways that you can talk about issues where somebody who may disagree with you philosophically can understand that the solution still is where you are. So I often, again, using opioids as the example, people will tell me it's a choice. I disagree about that, but they'll tell me it's a choice. They could make a different choice, and so we shouldn't help them. And I say, well, even if you think it's a choice and that people who make it deserve to die, which I disagree with you about, even then, all of the science and data tells us that we have to put harm reduction first and it will make because I think you agree with me that you don't want to find needles on our street or have people breaking into your houses or cars anymore. And the solution to that is X. And usually I can bring someone if I'm not demanding that they believe the morality that I believe. Now, there are certain things I don't have any movement on. Racial justice is one of them. I don't care if you believe what I believe about racial justice, but we do need to make the change. And there are certain areas where I will go there, but there are a lot of areas where it's not important for me whether or not people agree with me about the morality piece, but it's important for me that they agree with the solution.
Yeah, and I do have to disagree. I love finding needles in my backyard. It's like one of the highlights of my week. But as someone who has been addicted, I've faced addiction in my life, and I think the choice is there in the early stages, but once something really has a hold of you, it's not a choice in your head anymore. It just becomes a thing that you do. You have to do it because your body has become so dependent on the chemical, and that's where it gets into the sickness and the illness of addiction. And it's a tough thing because I've seen people in my own life who have suffered tragic consequences from addiction. And it's a very tough thing to talk about, but and I think you hit the nail on the head very beautifully when you were illustrating. Basically, it doesn't matter whether you come from the conservative side or what we call the liberal side. Most of the time, once we sit down and we have these open and honest conversations, we find out that we have a lot more in common than we have differently. We both want our loved ones to still be around come next Christmas. We still want our families to be able to make their bills. We still want our children to be taken care of. You know, these things are common through most of the people in our society. And if we could just get over these labels that they have us all under, I think we'd be a lot better off.
Right. And we talk about that a lot too with obviously, even though $15 is not the right place to be, it's the only place we can go, right? Like people just won't talk about the other side. Although I know that there's a legislator who was very against $15 an hour minimum wage, and I think he'll be proposing 20 this year. So, so I think the COVID really changed his response. Also, conversations that he and I had throughout the time that he was against 15. And one of the things that I always say is, they always bring up the benefits cliff. Well, you'll lose your benefits, and it will cost more. Well, so somebody asked me in testimony inside the legislature once, what do you say if I tell you that if we raise it to $15 an hour, you will gain $1 of, let's just say, but you'll lose 50 cents of benefits. That's what they asked me. And I said, what I hear you saying is that I just gained 50 cents of economic independence. And as a low-income single
but
mom.
Here's the problem, and here's the argument against the whole $15 an hour. Okay, so you're telling me as a business owner, I don't care what business I'm in, if it's flipping hamburgers, you're telling me I have to raise my wages to $15 an hour. Guess what I'm going to tell all my employees? You're fired. I don't need you anymore. If there's something that I've learned through COVID is that I can work with a lot less people. And I'm going to pay $45,000 to put in this hamburger flipping robot. And you can take that $15 an hour and you can head on down the road because you're not going to get it here. And that's going to be the problem. We're just going to automate jobs away at a faster pace.
So here's the place where when economists analyze it, it actually works. First of all, it has to happen all at once. I mean, not $15 tomorrow, but first of all, the first time that the $15 an hour bill went in Vermont, it was a 6-year increase. So it increased a little bit at a time. You have to make sure it goes above the cost of inflation, because if it doesn't go above inflation, then people don't gain any spending power. And so you have to make sure that they gain spending power. But when everybody has more money to survive, then they are more able to spend money in those local stores and restaurants. So if you increase your prices, I always say this about the coffee shop. If the coffee shop increases their prices for my already very expensive latte, right? If they increase it from $5 to $5.50, I'm probably not even going to notice that much, right? But however, if their employees then can pay their bills, then their employees are going out and spending money in other businesses. And right now we have a situation where people do not have the money in their pockets to do that. And the example I like to use is there was a store, it burned down. There's a restaurant, I live out in the country. There's a restaurant at the bottom of my hill that had egg and cheese sandwiches. They were really inexpensive. My son loved them. And frankly, I worked so many hours, most of his life, that I was always running around crazy and busy. I would have given anything to just be able to grab him egg and cheese sandwiches several times a week. But I couldn't afford to grab egg and cheese sandwiches several times a week. So I didn't go into that restaurant, except once every couple of weeks. I would have been purchasing a breakfast sandwich or 2 breakfast sandwiches from that restaurant probably 3 times a week if I could just pay my bills. And so that is money that business loses out on because another person doesn't have the resources to survive. And so we really have to create a society. And that's sort of where Yang's universal basic income comes from too, is that people need the money to survive. So whether it's that that our government, who could afford to do this, that our government decides to subsidize businesses while we're making this change, or whether we have to look for the solution. We have to say, yes, people need higher wages, period. So how do we make sure that can happen and businesses can survive while it's happening? We've seen through COVID that we are capable of giving people money. We are capable of giving businesses money. And it doesn't break our whole country. It breaks our states if we make them do it alone. but it doesn't break our country. Our country can do this. We are the most wealthy country on earth, in the history of the earth. We should be able to lift up the people that can't even have enough money to have a home.
And that's what's so frustrating, because you look at all this, all that money that they've given out, and it's like, okay, they've given it to all these corporations, but if you would have just given everybody in America a basic income, we could have funded Yang's dividend for and the entirety of American society for what we spent giving to corporations just in this last round of bailouts that we gave them. This so-called stimulus that we're supposed to get. And then they want to bitch and they want to complain about the American people getting a $1,200 check and talking about how $600 is a disincentive to work. Are you kidding me?
Yes.
It makes me so, it just pisses me off.
Right. I've loved to say things like, I don't know if they've noticed, but there's not a whole lot of jobs out there to work at. Like, these are people, they're not and nobody wants to stay at home all the time. The other day, because I've lost all my work and now I'm not running for office, right? So I'm still doing a lot of things, but there's moments that I have this downtime that I've never had in my life. And I thought I would enjoy that. And maybe I would have in the summer. I was too busy to know. But I thought I would enjoy it, but instead I'll find myself, on the couch, literally staring at the ceiling. And I'll be like, oh my God, it got dark out and I didn't even notice. No, nobody wants that. People want to be productive. They want to be active. They want to be making progress. They want to be helping their families survive. If you gave, I love how Bernie keeps saying we should give everybody $2,000 a month. If you gave, and several people in the Senate are saying that actually, and Congress. If you gave people $2,000 a month right now, and you said we're not going to take it away if you get a job, you're still going to get that extra $2,000 a month. There's all kinds of people that be like, I'm getting a job because, if you could find one, which a lot of people can't, but there's all kinds of people that would say, I'm getting a job and I'm going to get an extra $2,000 a month. And you know what I'm going to do with that? I'm going to go to my local bike shop and buy a new bicycle, or I'm going to go to my local restaurants and order food out once a week with my family. I think the thinking is all twisted, because for unemployment, yes, because if you lose your unemployment, if you get a job, you lose your unemployment. If we just gave people money and didn't take it away, if they got a job right now, if we acknowledge that even people who are working are suffering right now, then you would find that people would not be having to make an economic decision for their family. Because what they're really talking about when the senators say that is not that people are too lazy to work, that sometimes families have to make an economic decision so that their family can survive. If you don't put people in that position, then people want to work. I just keep coming back to that.
It's beautiful that you say that, because we've kind of experienced a little bit of evolution in our life, and it's like you said, when you first have that money, you're like, oh man, I've wanted or needed a bicycle for so long, I'm finally going to be able to go get that. And that's what happens for like the first, couple months. But then that money starts going towards things like, hey, you know what? Maybe we could save up and maybe we could start our own business. You know
Right.
what? Hey, maybe I can put this money to use and I can buy some stocks and I can get in the stock market instead of watching everybody else make gobs and gobs of money at the stock market. There's so many things, and it would be so beautiful to see a universal basic income in America, because I really believe that you would see a renaissance. You were talking about the starving artists a while ago, but if you gave the artists the ability to have their basic needs met, you would see new art. You would see so much creativity in this country. I think that it would be just unleashed.
So the thing that I didn't say in the beginning is that I have a Bachelor of Science, and I have a double major, but one of them is dance. And I was a choreographer and a dance educator for a long time in my life. And it was really hard financially survive in that career, I ended up creating out of it a business that went into schools to teach both dance education, but also civic engagement and education, engagement in social justice and all of that. And then a festival that helped to bring business to our community following Tropical Storm Irene. But being an artist, what I was able to do in terms of both bringing to children another chance at survival, but also being able to express some of what was going on in our society, really through the arts. And I think I always like to say to people who say we shouldn't be funding the arts right now, there's too much going on. I say, well, unless you don't enjoy movies, reading, looking at art in the walls, murals, dance, like unless you don't enjoy all of that stuff, we really should be funding the arts right now, because especially in this moment, artists are needed to get through it.
And for sure, and that seems to run in your family. If I'm not mistaken, when I was reading through your bio, didn't your grandfather wrote Roots?
My grandfather wrote the screenplay to Roots, not the book, but the screenplay. So yeah, the one that everybody watched. He wrote several episodes. Yeah. And was he also is a painter, but he was a painter, but he wrote several movies as I was growing up and screenplays. And he was so modest that I never understood that he was famous. I didn't really know that. He said, no, I came up in a time when you could make it, which is not the time that it is now for people who try. So that's how he saw himself. But he wrote incredible documentaries and incredible, not documentaries, but incredible movies about things that were going on in the world. My favorite actually was a made-for-TV movie, Lead Belly, about Lead Belly, the blues artist. And he also got a lot of credit for another movie about Chernobyl. So the work, again, through the arts, the work he was able to do to bring forward something that really happened, and like a historical fiction about things that really happened in our world, that was extremely important. And I was absolutely surrounded by the arts in my family. I was surrounded by dancers and painters, but all of those people had other careers as well, which is probably why I ended up straddling politics and the arts throughout my life.
So, Brenda, it has been so wonderful to be able to talk to you today. You have such an interesting story, I mean, just relatives discounted. I mean, your story has been so awesome to hear, the fight that you've been doing for what you feel is right in this country. And I feel like we need more people like you to be fighting. There's been this idea in my head to run for office here in Vermont. I like Peter Welsh. I think he's done a pretty good job. I think that the people in charge here in Vermont overall have done a pretty good job.
Mm-hmm.
They've done things that I haven't agreed with, but that's going to be anybody. I mean, I don't agree with everything that Andrew Yang says or does, but overall they've done a good job. But I feel like we need new blood. We need to move this window of people who believe in universal basic income, people who believe in equal rights for everybody, not just somebody's. We need to move these ideas forward. And I just feel like it's going to come from the younger generation. I feel like the older generation is dying out. This is their last grasp of power, and it's time for some new blood to get in there.
Yeah, and I want to just say that Gen X has really been given a raw deal. We're always forgotten. We're never mentioned. One time CNN listed all the generations. I don't know if you saw this. And then they left out Gen X. Like they completely left us out. So
you can't leave us out.
Gen X is going to save the world. And I don't know why people don't know that. And then second of all, it's really important that we recognize that there's a lot of people. And I'm 44. I just turned 44 I don't like it. I liked being 43 a little better, but that it felt a little younger, a lot younger. But I think it's really important that there's a lot of people to understand there's a lot of people in their 40s raising teenagers or children right now who really have been forgotten in this story, because we talk about millennials a lot. We talk about Gen Z a lot. We talk about boomers a lot, right? But we don't talk about this, the generation that was told that we would, if we just went to college or if we just did X, we just went to trade school, whatever it is, we would just succeed. And we found out pretty quickly that they were taking all that away from us, and it was going to be a struggle for all of us.
We got screwed, bro.
Yeah. So,
first
of all, we were lied to. Second of all, Gen X there's a story in Gen Xers that needs to be told about what we were told growing up and what was the reality of our world. Because in order to not repeat this history 3 generations from now, we have to make sure that we're saying out loud that we were told, we let this slip, that our parents' generation let this slip away. And
it's so frustrating to see. It's almost like our generation is like the stopgap. It's like we were the first ones to start waking up to the fact that, hey, you know what? Shit ain't like they've been telling us.
No, not at all.
This is not how it really works.
No, I always like to say that they look at us and say, they look at Gen X and they say, we're really sorry we messed up with you guys, but we're just going to skip at you and go to millennials because we already screwed it up. We don't know how to fix it. But the reality is we can fix it for this, because this generation is, 40s to 60 right now. We're the ones that are going to be aging next after our parents. And we have now, I know I'm not there yet either. I'm still young, actually. I'm still young, but we're going to be doing that next. And, but we haven't ever been given the chance to survive. Our generation has never. We were the first generation who made less than our parents. They like to say millennials are, but that's not true. We were the first generation who made less than our parents. And we have not been given the chance to survive. And so we need to stop thinking about it as generational, Gen X, millennial, Gen Z. We need to start saying, we need to create a path to survival in this country that is sustainable. Because the path that was created, that once was, while it was great that one person in the family could work and that we had that there was someone at home. First of all, not everyone wants to stay at home. But second of all, we need to start understanding that what we need to do is create a sustainable path to progress in our future, not just do whatever we want.
Yeah, for sure. I can remember when I was growing up, I grew up, originally I'm from Ohio, and I grew up in Akron, and my grandpa worked at the Goodyear plant, and my dad worked at All Sides, and then the Goodyear plant closed down, All Sides closed down, and you just rip these gaping holes in the economy. And it's like Reptoid just pointed out, we were told if we worked hard, we would have enough money to be able to get retirement and all that stuff. But slowly, as the ages have passed, we've seen that life shrink and shrink and shrink, and now it's virtually non-existent.
No,
in this country, you either got enough to pay all your bills, you don't have enough to one or the other. There's usually very little in between anymore.
There really isn't. The middle class is shrinking. It's been shrinking for a long time. And we were sold a bill of goods. I like that way to say it. We were absolutely sold a bill of goods that was not delivered to us. And I think oftentimes you'll see Gen X politicians or activists, they have a different way of talking because we're a little more nihilistic than other generations, because we were like latchkey kids and there wasn't a whole lot of people paying attention to us. So we are a little more nihilistic. We have a different way of talking, but also we're angry, and we should be angry because it wasn't our generation that created this. We were told it was all fixed. Don't worry about it. Don't pay attention. Look the other way. You don't need to be part of this process. Don't worry about this till you're older. We were told all that stuff. And if you just work hard, you'll succeed. And I don't think our parents knew that it was being taken away from us, but it was. And so now we're pissed. I'm pissed. And so when you see Gen X politicians talking, you have a just whole different scenario in the way that they present themselves, right? Because they're like, no, I was told that I'd go to college and we'd be good, but I'm on SNAP benefits. So
Yeah, so yeah, that whole college thing is such a scam. But yeah, I mean, even so, I just see it. Everything's moving towards tech. Everything's moving towards. So if you aren't in that field and you aren't in one of the STEM fields, you're probably going to get left behind in this country. But the fact that there's so few STEM jobs available, and you got to think, are people who live in, the inner city, are they going to have access to these same, things that other people are going to have access to? Where's the opportunities? Because there's only so many of those jobs. And if we're all fighting for those jobs, like, what the hell are we going to be doing in 10 or 15 years? That's kind of scary.
And here in Vermont, we have a beautiful culture, actually, of it's really interesting the way that we coexist kind of with people who maybe disagree with us. However, there is still a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues with racism. There's a lot of other issues. And I think that when we look at what we value in work, why don't we value people who advocate in the legislature? Why don't we value activists? Why don't we value the arts? Why don't we value these kinds of work that are going to be what we're left with when as we move forward, especially through COVID, when a lot of things don't come back? Those things have been so crucial to us. Why don't we have an economic value on that work? Because we need it to survive.
Yeah, Brenda, it's hard to be racist when everybody's white.
But I will tell you, people of color in this state have experienced extreme racism. And during my race, I have white, actually since before my race, but definitely since my race, I have white supremacists who follow me and threaten me as a Jewish woman in this state. And
really?
Yes, and that happens. And we had our only Black female legislator was racist threats drove her out of office.
It seems so odd because I have not run into that really here in Vermont. Maybe it's just a fringe thing. I hope. I don't know, because most everybody here seems, I don't know, really, really nice. And I've seen interactions happen, and I've never seen anything untoward.
Yeah, I think that you really have to be of the marginalized community to experience that. The most awful things I've experienced as someone who's run actually are related to my poverty. There are people who come onto social media or publicly who say that, maybe I should just go get a job or work an extra job. I'm like, or be quiet. We don't want to hear from you. Or stop running for office. Yeah. Stop running for office on the state's money, whatever it is. But the things that have been hardest are the ones where they say, or actually they're not hard for me because they're so stupid, but I just want to make sure other people don't have a reaction when they see those things. Are things like, I don't understand why you are so proud of being a single mom. That shows that you had bad judgment. And I'm like, no, listen up, buddy.
I mean, bro, I've had bad judgment two times in my life before, so it is what it is.
I didn't choose to be a single mom, but I was left alone with a kid. I'm not only a single mom, I'm an only parent, and I am proud of myself. I don't know if those people have ever raised a child by themselves, but yeah, I'm a badass. I am proud.
For sure. Listen, hey, I'm telling you what, my son is 5 years old, and his mama is such a blessing to me because she helps me keep my sanity because he is so much like me, and she's the common sense to all of us. So
I don't want to burst any bubbles, but when they get older, I just want to make people sure. I'm like going to spread the news. My son's standing right there. When they get older, they're just as much work. So I'm sorry to burst that bubble. But
oh, listen, I already know I was a handful when I was younger. I don't know how my mama didn't beat me half silly. So.
Yeah.
Brenda, I want to thank you so much for being on today. It has been fun. It has been enjoyable. And I sure hope that we can have another conversation here in the very near future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me on the show.
Absolutely. Is there any last words that you want to give out to the Yang Gang?
Yeah, I think I just want to say to folks that to hang in there. It's a really hard time right now, and we're going to have to all stick together, and we're going to have to all push forward. So it is not a time to give up right now. We're going to have to, just like Yang is out there doing the work, knocking on doors right now, we're going to have to all continue to do the work. So whether it's 5 minutes once a week, once a month, or every day that you have time, figure out what way you can help push forward progress and be part of the change that we have to make so that we all can not only survive but also thrive, because that's how we create a country that works for all of us.
Absolutely. Brenda, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
For sure. Well, there you have it, Yang Gang. And it just further illustrates the point. You know, we've had on Trumpers, we've had on Bernie supporters, we've had on Yang supporters, we've had on supporters of Crazy Town Banana Pants, Marianne Williamson, who we love to death because we feel like her voice is one that is much needed in Washington right now. But through all of these interactions that we've had, we find out one thing. We're all just normal, regular people. Most of us just part of the broke folk boat, just trying to survive. And that's something that we're going to have to hold in our hearts as we move forward in this country, because guess what? I don't care if you are a Trump supporter. He lost. It sucks. Whatever. If Biden would have lost, we would have been saying the same thing. It sucks. Whatever. Move on. Because the fact of the matter is, until we get to a position of power in Congress and on all these down ballots, it's not going to matter, because we have to move the chains ourselves. So it's going to take all of us putting in the effort. And if you can't run for an office, support somebody who's running for an office. And on this show, we try not to do too much of the whole, getting people on from certain areas, because I kind of feel like in the Yang Gang, we've done that a lot and it doesn't get a lot of viewership. So when we have people on this show that are good for the whole country, and I'm telling you what's the truth, Brenda had a whole bunch of ideas that could move this country forward in a big, big way. So we want to thank her for being on the show. Yang Gang, we love you. Thank you to all of our Patreons and supporters of this channel. Without you, we couldn't do it. Thank you for joining us at the new crib. We'll see you on the next one.